Welcome to Season 2 of the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. An education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. Let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheesley Balis, and in today's episode, we're talking about how to truly meet the needs of toddlers and their parents. I am delighted to have with me today Simone Davies, the author of the Montessori Toddler and co-author of the Montessori Baby, which are comprehensive guides to raising toddlers and infants in a Montessori way. The books are based on Simone's 15 plus years of experience working as an AMI Montessori teacher in Sydney and Amsterdam. Simone also has a popular blog, Instagram, and podcast called The Montessori Notebook. She's the mother of 2 young adults. Simone currently runs parent-child Montessori classes in Amsterdam at her school, Jacaranda Tree Montessori, and is working on another book with Junifa Uzadika, the Montessori Child for children from 3 to 12 years, which will come out in early 2024. So welcome, Simone. Thank you so much for being here today with us. We're so excited to have you here. I need you to know that I have shared both your infant book and your toddler book with everyone I know who has a baby. They get at least one of them. And I've gotten so much positive feedback that they really appreciate it. Your books are so well laid out. And if you have not seen them, folks at home, highly recommend them. So I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And I'm also delighted because I actually listen to your podcast. So to be on it as a guest was really fun as well. So thank you for having me.
Well, I love that. I think that's a resounding endorsement of our podcast because you have
You can use it any way you like.
Well, okay, so let's dig right in. So tell us why toddlers are so brilliant.
I know. I love toddlers so much. And actually, when I was writing the Montessori toddler, I was kind of just Googling, does anyone like toddlers? So I put in toddlers are brilliant. And it came up with no responses. And I'm like, no one thinks that toddlers are brilliant. But I am going to change that paradigm. I'm going to make to the shift. And basically, I love hanging out with toddlers because they live in the present moment. Like no other age of child, I think. They really you'll be walking down the street and they have to stop and notice a little weed growing out of the pavers and pointing at it. And you're like, I had never noticed that. I'm so busy making lists in my head, and they really remind us to slow down. They're seeing these things for the first time and they're so curious and they move a lot. So they see a lot as well. I also love toddlers because, yes, they can be emotional, and that's why they get a bad reputation. But on the other hand, once you've helped guide them through these big feelings, which we might talk about if it comes up during the episode, then on the other side, they just bounce back and they're their lovely, joyous self again. Where I know, for myself or for teenagers, for example, we can wake up grumpy and stay grumpy the whole day. So I also think they're very honest people. They just don't have any pretense yet. They're not trying to mask or try to please you or anything. They just are who they are. So if a toddler gives you a hug, it's the biggest, as you say, endorsement in a way, a big hug. Then you'd be like, wow, they really see me and they see that they're being seen and accepted. So this kind of energy, I feel like I'm probably a toddler in an adult's body, and I just really appreciate their honesty. And yeah, if they're in a bad mood, they'll tell you, and then they get over it, and they're lovely humans to be about. So they're very uncomplicated, and they say what they feel and feel what they say.
Actually, that's such a great role model for so many of us they're completely present to their emotions. They're completely present. They're not doing any kind of social games, right? They're not pretending they feel a certain way. So it really is, in some ways, it's such a clean relationship, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And I was saying to one of the families in my classes, because I run a parent toddler community. So every morning there's 12 families, and then we have snack time. And that's when the parents really sit back, or the caregivers, and they sit back, and there's 12 children sitting in a U shape, and I sit in the middle and I serve them all food. And one child's asking for some more orange juice, another can't reach the crackers that they want. And I have so much fun. And I said, I actually think I enjoy hanging out with these 12 toddlers for snack time every morning than a group of 12 adults. I would find that more awkward.
Well, and I'm sure that the parents are learning so much from you. So, you have said that you think anyone who's a Montessori educator should get their assistance to infancy training. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of kind of what we were talking about, they're so pure, and you can't kind of talk a toddler into doing something that they don't want to do very easily, you know? And so when we work with older children, we may actually kind of even debate, like, is it work if it's not freely chosen? Because we might actually manipulate what kind of choices they're making and which presentations we want to give them and when they work and who they're working with. And, you know, maybe we're kind of manipulating the situation. But with a toddler, it's raw and unedited. And so what you see is what you get. And you see this child that you really have to see, this is maybe what we need to happen in the community, and how can I get the toddler on board so I can work with them? There's no bribing or, you know, praise or anything like this. It just can be a really great practice to see another human being, to accept them for who they are. And, you know, then once you've practiced with a toddler to do that, then any other age in a way feels easier, because they can also articulate their needs. We have to observe them so much, you know, as a, you know, infant or toddler guide, because they can't necessarily communicate their needs. So the observation piece is we get really good at observing the subtlest little movements. Like if a child brings their work closer to them at the table, they're saying, I don't want anyone to touch it right now. And we might need to translate for them, which can be really useful when you get to a 3 or 6 year old or a 6 to 12-year-old who might need some help, you know, with what they need to say. We can translate. So I find that it's such a useful grounding, and that, yeah, everyone should learn about the infants and toddlers.
Well, I love that. And actually, it's very inspiring to me. I'm in the middle of a master's degree program right now, and that is maxing me out. But maybe one day, I really love the idea of having those skills. And when I watch Toddler Guides with the children, it's so beautiful and so magical. And I know that magic has come from that deep transformation and that deep respect for the child. And there is it is a different way of thinking about people in the toddler classroom, where, yes, we're supporting them in learning how to be in community. We're supporting them in understanding themselves and understanding each other and starting to understand who they are in the world. And if that was our definition for all of education, that, I mean, really, what a beautiful mantra to have for education, where it's, who are you? How are you going to contribute? How can you be in community? And how do we support you with that? Rather than, which is, I think, underscoring what you're saying, which is we're not looking at them as this empty vessel that we have to kind of shove things into.
And I think it's also a good practice to start when they're toddlers, because you're not expecting them to become an engineer at this age. And so you really practice at seeing who they are and who they're becoming, as opposed to putting our own preconceptions or on when are they going to learn and read to write. There's none of those pressures. You just really can say, oh, this child's developing on their movement, like practicing their movement right now. This child's practicing their language. This child is not doing either of those things and is observing. And so it's much easier to really practice that acceptance piece, I think, at this age. And so then you carry that skill through to like that 6 to 12 age, where maybe they're not progressing in an area and the educator or the parent is becoming stressed about that. So yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to what are we looking at as the purpose of education? And I'm reading Education and the Significance of Life right now, and it's so interesting to think about what he's pointing out. And forgive me, I don't remember the author off the top of my head, but what he's pointing out is that when we start to create these significant agendas for our children, we're not actually giving them any room to discover who they are. And at the toddler level, we really know they're discovering who they are in that community. And wouldn't it be beautiful to bring that up through all the levels and make sure that it's present?
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever done it in any of your workshops at Greenspring or with other educators. It's like really to look in the eyes of someone opposite you for like 2 minutes and observe them without any preconception of who they are, and to really look in their eyes. And when we do that with a toddler, when you have that done to you, you really like feel like there's so much space to be anyone, right? And so we practice that with the toddler so beautifully, like you said, because they are still revealing themselves and they can't express themselves and all those kind of things. So it could be a really nice practice as well for educators to try it with their other colleagues or something like that, to just really see how much expectation are we putting in children, and can we really look at them as like waiting to see what they're going to reveal about themselves to us.
I love that. I love that. So really what you're saying is the children are gifts. These toddlers are gifts, and the training is a gift to have that framework. It can really be a gift throughout our Montessori communities.
Absolutely. And I think what I end up doing is practicing Montessori in everyday transactions, you know, people who I meet and things like that, because you're applying the same lens. And I think that that's really beautiful, because you see everyone for their uniqueness. Even if they're frustrating, you're like, oh, this is actually my work. I wonder why they're frustrating me right now. And that's what we do in the classroom. Oh, that child is, you know, pushing a button. That's my work, not their work. You know, you can't blame a toddler. So I think it's like so good to just really peel back layers and to do our adult preparation, which we all love in Montessori. So yeah, it's really beautiful work.
That's so beautiful. We could just stop there. No, we're not going to, listeners, but I just want you to know that is it, right? That is it. And that is actually what a beautiful gift to us, to get to be Montessorians and get to have this be the spiritual, our spiritual work is so profound as we are educating these children, that it changes our spirits and changes our souls and makes us such better people. And I feel so grateful for that. So I also know that our listeners, you know, they're working, they have everybody just brought in brand new children into their classroom, at least in the United States. You all are probably on a different schedule. And we've started the school year, and they have these little people who may have needs that they are not quite sure how to meet. So can you talk a little bit about meeting the needs of the toddler that's walked through your door?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I know myself, like when I finished my Montessori training, I went back into the classroom thinking, I know all these presentations and I'm going to go and show this child how to do the hand washing, or I'm going to go show this child the button frame. And if they're not interested, they will just walk away. It's the most humbling thing working with a toddler, because maybe a 3 to 6 year old child might, you know, go along with you and persist in seeing a presentation that there really is not meeting their needs. And instead, what I love to do is, keep observing every child and seeing when they need help. So I'm actually do less formal presentations than I expected. And the more your class gets normalized, shall we say, then the older children are modeling for the younger children, and the younger children are watching the older children, as they do in every Montessori classroom. So a lot of my work is really just stepping in when they need a little bit of help, and I really have to slow down my movements. And like with a 3 to 6 child, I have to just say, look, and then model how maybe a key turns or something like this, and then step back and see how they get on for themselves. And so again, it's that very pure, like, I'm not going to give you exactly how this works. The child is very much exploring with their hands, and it might not be how we expected them to do it. So I've had a child, for example, get the watering can, go and fill it up and start pouring it into a bucket. And this was in maybe the 3rd year I was working, and I had another guide, and I said, is that okay? Like, they're not really doing what they're meant to be doing with the watering can. And it was the best advice that she gave me, which was just like, is the child concentrating? Yes, the child's concentrating. Are they hurting themselves? No. Are they hurting someone else? No. Are they hurting the environment? No. Then preserve concentration, make a mental note, and come back. And another time when there's a neutral time, or they're coming close to the watering can, then we can show them, oh, you know, you can also use the watering can to water the plants. And I've even had children who've got the watering can, filled it up, and poured it straight onto the floor. And this is really interesting. But then they go over to the mop, and then they mop the floor, and then they go back and they repeat the whole thing. So actually, the child's concentrating, they're not hurting anyone or the environment. If it turns into a flood, then I might have to say, step in and to be very kind and clear and say, there's lots of water. I'm worried the other children might slip on this because it's getting close to snack time. We're going to put away the water now, and we'll, you know, see if we can meet their needs in another way. So I think was one of my biggest learnings, was like, oh, what it was like in my training, how we have these perfect lessons where the child has a beginning, middle, and end. A toddler doesn't necessarily work like that. They often have what we call a point of interest instead. And so the child will go and get their jug and take it over to the water source and then bring it back to the hand washing table and empty it into the bowl. And that might be the only thing that they continue to repeat for that cycle that day, where we're expecting for a 3 to 6 year old child that they would be able to then, wet their hands and use the soap and go through the whole process. But that's closer to like a 2.5-year-old toddler. And the 16-month-old toddler, we have to go where they are today, which is practicing carrying the water with 2 hands. And how much precise work that is. If they repeat that 10 times and then spilling less and less each time, then they're refining a skill. So it does just look very different, I think, in reality than what I expected in any case when I was doing my Montessori training. And actually, I really appreciate that I was working as an assistant in a classroom while I was doing my Montessori training, so I could really put up my hand and say, okay, I know you said that the child's going to do that, and this is what happens. And we had some really interesting conversations about that as well.
It is a gift to be able to have that framework as you're going through training, for sure. And it sounds like you go to you want to make sure always that you're making the child right. That's what I'm hearing from you. So it doesn't mean that you let them do, they're not swinging the mop around their head, because that would be dangerous, right? But I love the frame of the 3 questions, and then really getting present when you feel that tightness in your gut or that tightness in your chest. So I'm going through my 3 questions. It's not happening the way I wanted it to happen, and getting ourselves out of the way. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, and sometimes I think we do. But yes, I need to step back and see, this isn't how I expected, but it's okay and everyone's safe. But my job is also everyone's safety. So I'm really okay with stepping in and being kind and clear and saying, you really want to do that, and I'm worried that the other children are doing this. So can you help me? And then I kind of want to acknowledge their feelings as much as possible. And in that situation, I'm also I don't love the word redirect, because I feel with a toddler, you really need to let them process exactly what they need without like distracting them, because if you distract them, then it will just explode basically later. But at the same time, if I can meet their need in another place. So if they're banging and they wanted to bang on the glass thing, and I was worried it was going to break, then I say, it looks like you want to do some banging. We have a drum over here. Let's go and bang over here. Or we can punch these pillows. Which would you like to do? And they find it hilarious when I start punching the pillows, and they might join me. So I think that it's both. It's like, yes, I need to step out, but when my stomach's clenching, it can also be a sign that I do need to set a limit. And it's better to set that limit early than to go so far and then there's water everywhere and then it feels like chaos. And yet it's a really great Montessori teacher who can still have had something completely upend, and there's 5 liters of water on the floor, and everyone in the classroom is basically getting some kind of cloth or mop and working together to mop, because that is our work then for the next 15 minutes. It's not what we expected, but it's still all learning. And actually another really great example of that was when I was a parent going to a parent-toddler group. That's how I found out about Montessori. Was I attended a group, it doesn't exist anymore, called Down Under 3 with Fern Van Zale. And one of the children peed during class, and so their clothes were wet. And, normally the parents want to whisk off the children to, get them all clean because they're kind of embarrassed and that kind of thing. And Fern was just really able to be this calm and clear guide and say, oh, I see your clothes are wet. When you're ready, there's a stool over here and we can find your clothes and you can do that. And the child took a little bit of time to go over. It took them about 25 minutes for them to change clothing, to wipe up the floor. And their work wasn't all of that special work, doing all of the manipulatives that are in our beautiful Montessori classrooms. Their work that day was practical life, which is taking care of ourselves. And that can be actually the most important work, because if a child can take care of themselves, all the manipulatives take care of themselves.
Wow. I so appreciate that. I think that's such a great distinction. And let me just ask you, I imagine some folks may be thinking, yeah, but what if they don't ever decide they want to change? I've had children who don't feel that they're wet. They're not motivated. And at what point do you step in, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that if the child is really not helping to tidy up at that point, then I would be a kind and clear guide and say, oh, when you finish that activity, then it's important for us to make this clean for everybody. And then I look and I observe for that moment when they've really finished their activity, so that then there's a pause and they're standing up, and then I will just kindly guide them towards the bathroom. And I try, and if I ever have to handle a child, I always try and get their permission, or I say, I'm using my gentle hands and I'm guiding you this way, you know, so I'm never picking them up without their things, without their permission. And there's just a respect as well. And they know that I understand them and that I want to make it right for them and for us. So also, like, if they're really like working for another half an hour on something, which really is quite a long concentration for a toddler, they often don't work for half an hour on something. If they really, then I might say, look, it looks like you really want to keep working with the activity. Let's find somewhere safe that we can keep that activity. Like an older child, they might be able to have their name card and they put it while they go to the toilet and things like that. But toddlers, we don't tend to have that kind of sophistication. But I would, for an older child, be definitely able to say, let's put it somewhere safe. And then when they know that they're going to be able to come back to it, they usually, it's basically, like a parent actually came up with these great things. So they said it's like a Venn diagram. And I know this is a podcast, but just work with me, everybody. You have one circle, which is what the child wants to do. And on the other circle is what we need them to do. And when you get the Venn diagram to intersect, that's like the sweet spot. And that's just working with the child, what Alfie Kohn calls working with rather than doing to. So we're not bribing, but we're basically understanding them, acknowledging them, and then being a kind and clear guide to give them any help they need to make it happen.
I love that. And I have to tell you, I just heard this distinction. I really have been thinking about it a lot, that we have two ways that we deal with other human beings. We're either in domination or partnership. And I really have been chewing on that, and I haven't come up with a scenario where that's not true. I think that's exactly what we're talking about in education. And the truth is that no one wants to be dominated, or very few, right? Like that's not a toddler, not an adult. No one wants that experience. And so I find that that's really helpful to offer, especially to young guides or folks who are coming in new, who are coming from a model where, you know, it's do it because I say so. And that's not how we roll. You know, it just doesn't support the child in having that experience of partnership that elevates their spirit and really centers their spirit as the most important thing, right? We always want to have the child at the center.
And I think that word partnership describes it perfectly, because we're on their team. We're basically helping them to become themselves. So we're on their side. And the same if I'm working with parents or caregivers, is I can say, like, at the moment, when we're talking about a battle, that's against each other. How can we get on the same side of the table and be working in partnership to make whatever thing kind of happen? So
yeah, anytime you go into a battle with anyone, child, adult, you both lose. Like that's just how it is. Anytime there's a power struggle, yes, you may get them to do, I tell parents this quite frequently, you might get them to do what you want them to do short term, but there you've just damaged the relationship, because you're here rather than how do we fit together? How can we make this work? And it's that flow. So, and certainly we see our guides, our toddler guides, in a way, they're the master of the flow, right? And a master of feeling that and being able to navigate that with the children. Really, it's keeping the child feeling empowered, even as they're stepping into the community, maybe in a different way or operating from a different place.
And our prepared environment invites that from the moment they walk in for the first time. They're like, oh my goodness, I've never been in a space where everything is set up for me. And like, I've had a child walk in and just get on and off the chair, the little chair, for 15 minutes because it was their size. And just today in class, there was a child going up and down a staircase that we have that's built so that they can hold onto the rails. And they went up and down for maybe even it was 10 minutes. And I had to talk the parent or caregiver through saying, okay, now, they might be wanting to do this, and that's because they're practicing this and they're mastering it. And because to the parent, like they're wasting their time. Why are they just practicing climbing a stair when there's all these cute toys that they can play with, is what the parent thinks. So yeah,
I appreciate that. And I think that parent ed is so critical. So Okay, so can you talk about how the term follow the child really comes into play in the toddler classroom, and how to know when to step in and offer a presentation?
Yeah, so I think as we were talking about before is like, we know as Montessori educators that we're meant to follow their development and their needs and things like that. But often we write lists of all these presentations that we need to do. And in a toddler class, I have that in the back of my mind, but mostly I'm really following what they're working on, because a young toddler particularly doesn't come in with any plan of what's going to happen today. They walk in and they bump into the shelf and they try a few activities before they really become interested and engaged in one of the activities. So how can I possibly say, let's do this puzzle right now? And instead, I'd rather, as I kind of support them when they get stuck. So if they're doing a puzzle that's more difficult than they've ever tried before, I'm going to first observe and see how far they get. And then if they're really struggling and you see there's that moment that they're about to give up, that's the moment to step in and say, can I give you some help? And another Montessori educator has a beautiful phrase that if their hands are on the activity, my hands are off the activity, because it's so easy as with a young child to kind of just take over their work because they can't verbalize that they need help and things. And again, it's observing, getting their permission, like, can I show you something? And then you kind of see it in their face that they're happy, or they pull it closer to them and then no, they're just going to keep going and like try it themselves. And we have to be okay with that as well. But I either offer help by verbal instruction, like turn for a puzzle piece or something like that. Or I say, can I show you? And then I'll have a turn and then I'll very slowly turn the puzzle piece. Or the child does not want any help and I'm just going to make a mental note. Let me just see if they want any support, but otherwise they might come back to me. And 3 weeks later, I turn around and they've managed to work it out themselves. So that's kind of how I gauge, like when I need to step in, when I need to give a presentation. But again, it's mostly, particularly with young toddlers, a step of that longer process. And then really a toddler for 2.5, they're maybe even already starting to transition into the casa by then I'd be able to show them a longer sequence, like sewing, for example. They would really be able to sit through a whole sewing presentation and be really interested because they're ready for it. They're ready for that level of the detail, and that you have to flip the card over so that the string doesn't get stuck, and they can see all of those small little details. So, and also I don't know if this happens in all Montessori toddler classes, but I'm actually very relaxed about them not taking work to the table when they're really young toddlers, because again, I want to preserve the concentration. Because what happens often with a 16-month-old, for example, who's just entering my environment, if I say, oh, look, it comes to the table, it's enough to break their concentration and they're off onto the next thing. So I'd rather them first get their confidence working with some of the materials. And then I see closer to 2 years that then there's that moment when they've gone to an activity, they're going to play with it. And I can say, oh, would you like to bring it to a mat or a table? And then it happens very naturally and much more less than pulling children and forcing them, which I think we get in our heads. Okay, they're meant to be working on a mat, they're to be working at a table. And then we end up not being Montessori at all because we're doing top down and moving children when they're actually not wanting to be moved.
I really appreciate that. I hadn't really heard that before. And I think that's really important that we honor, it really is meeting them right where they are and making sure that that we're looking at them as a unique individual. And it's interesting because as I read Dr. Montessori's works, there are a lot of things that we've come up with as kind of a Montessori community that she was not so focused on. I haven't seen anywhere where she talked about for the young child having to work on a mat, right? And I just read an interesting article even in the AMS Life magazine about, there's a woman who's a Montessori historian and she can't find anywhere she talked about the 3-hour work cycle, yet we hold it so sacred. And so it's interesting to start to reflect on what are the things that we've kind of made up, and where are we really serving the child, and where are we becoming more adult centered.
Yeah, it's very, very easy to do Montessori, but be top down still, because we want our materials to be used in a certain way. And I think that's actually very challenging at the toddler level, because they might just take apart a puzzle and do it in a completely different way than we were expecting. And again, can we actually step back and see that they're still doing work? It's just not the work we expected it to be done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about preparing the environment in a way that really supports the child and supports the adults in the classroom as well?
Absolutely. So, I mean, in our toddler spaces, we're always trying to make things as accessible as possible for them, and so that the environment works. And I'm just thinking of an example in my own classroom where I used to have open shelves where the snack materials would be provided. So they'd take their own placemat and their glass and things like that. But that shelf was open so that all the way through class, anyone could access it, which has its advantage. They can get a glass if they'd like a glass of water, but it often meant that a young toddler would play with the glasses, and they're tools, they're not toys. We're going to use them to drink. So I'm really happy that in my new classroom, I have a drawer in the kitchen, which I've just, as I would at home, put all of the things down low. And then at snack time, the children open the drawer and they help themselves. And that really stops kids playing with it. So I'm always looking, how can I get the environment to help me right now? So I know that in the the second Montessori classroom I ever worked in, when we were closing up the classroom and we were just doing a short circle time to transition to naps, they actually had some Velcro along the open shelves to stick up some curtains so that the materials weren't available anymore. And it was just like, okay, well, this is a way that we've come up with that's going to help us, because when the children are pulling things out, I can't give them the attention that they need to during singing time because I'm focused on something else. Or it could be a child comes over with a big runny nose. Have we got that tissue box down low for them? Or are all your children pulling all the tissues out? So then how are you going to set up your tissue station so that not all the tissues are used? And then I've been in environments where we've carefully cut them in half and folded them and made a little tower of just 5 tissues and then just keep replacing them so that we don't lose all the tissues. So it's just always like, how can I make it accessible for them? But how can it also support me? So every time that a parent, because I also have parents in my classroom, ask for help, like, oh, I can't find that, then I'm like, okay, how can I set this up so that they don't need to ask me this? And I love to help families do that at home as well, because I remember having a cup of tea with one of Oliver's friends. He was having a play date and I was having a cup of tea with the parent, and every 5 minutes the boys would run in and say, we need some scissors, and she'd have to get up from the table and she's looking through all her drawers trying to find them some scissors, and then they come back and then she gives them the scissors, and 5 minutes later it's, now we need tape, and so then they go looking for tape. And like, as a Montessori educator, if you have a home environment, you know already you just have all of these things available at their level, but a lot of parents don't know this, so it's really fun to be able to guide parents like, oh, see this, how we have this supply drawer, you could set up something similar like this at home, and they're like, oh, I never thought of that, and it's going to help you.
And snacks, getting snacks to where the child can help themselves to something healthy and just
so good.
Right, have that.
And I had one family who were like, oh, they worked out that they can open the fridge and they just want cheese all the time. I'm like, okay, that's okay. How much cheese are they allowed to have? Like, would be okay for you. And so we worked out that they could get a child-sized container that the child could open the lid and they'd just refill it every day with the amount of cheese and put the rest of the block up out of reach. And now then say they've ate it all at 9 o'clock in the morning, then the parent just can say, oh, it's all gone.
That's right.
It's all gone. We'll fill it again tomorrow. And it's like, it's actually the environment doing our work. It basically shows them how much is there. And then they learn to wait a bit and maybe eat their snack around 10. And yeah, I love it.
That's so brilliant and so needed. Okay, so talk a little bit, if you will, because it can be challenging, right? You're a Montessori guide or a Montessori assistant, and you have all these different types of families that you're serving, all these different types of children. Can you talk about the work that you do to ensure that you're accepting each child and each family right where they are?
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things, because we need to check any biases at the door so that everyone feels safe. Like, it's such a safe bubble in our Montessori classrooms. And I work with the parents as well as the children. I think that any educator does, in a certain respect. So we have to treat every family member also with a lot of respect. And we have a few small things that are very toddler friendly. Like, we have on our, as you walk in, it says, you are welcome here. and it has it in all the different languages from all the different families that come to our classes. And so some of the older children might be able to recognize, for example, like we had a Japanese family and they could see that they were Japanese, letters, and they really felt like, oh, that helps us feel like we belong here. And then, of course, our books, we try to make sure that they reflect everybody in the classroom. And we actually make every year, or every course, but yeah, with the children who are coming to classes, they send in a photo about something that they like doing, and then I make a little book, and it might say Rowan likes playing in the cozy cube, and then the next page will say Saoirse goes to the beach, and they just love finding themselves in the book. And to them, that's, I'm here, but also I see other friends who are in the class in this book as well. So that's them recognizing themselves and also seeing that everyone's different. And it's really fun if like two children have been playing at the beach, then I might put those two photos next to each other to say we look different, but we like also doing the same things. So that's really fun. I think like as much as we can incorporate their languages, sometimes I do like some counting, just some simple 1 to 10 counting, and then each family will count in their language, and the child, you see them like, oh, that's Romanian, I speak Romanian, like they recognize their language. So there's small things like that that we do as a community. And then there's that personal work that I always as I'm a toddler, I kind of find it really fun just to see everyone with fresh eyes and be curious, and making sure that our language is like open as well, so that I never make an assumption about family members and things like that. So it's always your partner, or until you know better, so that they can specify how they would like to identify. I think that's the most important thing I've learned, is that identity is how someone recognizes themselves. And so if it might be, for example, how a neurodiverse person, they might say, I have an autistic child. And so they're doing identity first language. And another person would rather do person first and say, I have a child with autism. And I just want to, I will say whatever is important to them. Does that make sense? Instead of, I've heard and I've followed all of the most important trainings right now that say it should be identity first or vice versa, and just meet every family with what their preferences are. We do our best. We get it wrong, and then we can apologize if we make a mistake.
Well, I think that I can imagine how much they appreciate how much care and thought you put into giving them the opportunity to define that, and then remembering and holding them, really each family's structure as unique and valuable and sacred.
Yeah. And that safety is important for not only the child, but for the family to feel safe in the environment.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, which allows them then to, well, we know human beings are designed to always think that we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. And then we can't learn because our nervous system is on guard. So we have to actively support the relaxation and the balancing of the nervous system for our parents and children, and for school leaders, staff, right? It's our big work.
It's basically partnership. That word you used before is partnership with the family, partnership with our colleagues, partnership in community. And they're seeing that. There's actually a really beautiful interview I once did with Bill Conway. He used to be the head of school in a school in Australia. And I found this article where it just talked about the cleaner at their school. And the cleaner had said, I love that I get invited to school events because they include me as an important part of their school. And I just thought, that's so special. Like, we don't think of some of those support staff and really invite them to be part of our community. They come after hours, we don't see them, but this cleaner was really like, also, I thought that was really special.
That's so beautiful, right? That is so beautiful to have every member who supports the community feel valued and tended to. Okay, so now a big question. Observation, record keeping, like these logistics, we're working with these children, we're pouring our hearts out to them, we're giving them everything we have, and we have to observe. How does it fit? How do we make that work?
I know. I feel like I struggle with it as well. And until I realized that observation gives you more time because you understand the child better, you see when that moment is to step in and not step back, and to step back when we're not needed. So I remember I had just a really interesting dynamic in one of my classes with some children that were just bumping up against each other. So there was a lot of tears. And so it felt like there was tears, we were patching things, then there were more tears, and then we were patching things. And so I just said to the families, I'm going to observe today and I'm just going to see what's going on because I think I'm missing something. And when I sat on my stool, I only had to get up 4 times the whole class because I was able to observe when something was a tricky situation that needed to be navigated and I could step in before something even escalated, or let a situation play out and the children could resolve it themselves. So when you observe, you get more time. And then I also think that if we do have assistants in the classroom or people who are doing, helping in the class, it's actually great for them to do the observation work because then you can compare notes. And it's really great for them to build that observation skill. So I have from time to time had a volunteer in the class, and there was one in particular who really loved observation. And then after class, as we were preparing, we would be always talking about the children and comparing notes and what I didn't see, because if I do an observation with a parent, I love doing it side by side with the parents and caregivers. So I'll write about the child and they'll write. And we're practicing using that objective language, which I think for parents particularly is quite difficult because they want to say, oh, my child really likes cars, like really likes the vehicles, instead of, okay, how do you know they like the vehicles? What are you actually seeing? Do you see a smile on their face? Do you see them repeat the activity for 5 to 10 minutes? You see them work with the material in many different ways, so that's actually what we're observing, what the video camera can see. And so I like doing it alongside, but also what's really fun is like I might be focusing more on the fine motor movements that the child's making, and the parent might be writing down more of the language or the nonverbal communication that's happening. And then you get an even bigger picture of the child. So I think getting the assistants or anyone who's in training, for example, on board with being part of that observation piece can also be a great help as well.
I completely agree with you. And I think it's one of those things that really reinforces their value as community members. We want their observation notes. We want their input. Their voice matters. And so we find that's a really important piece. The thing I think we struggle with is making time for it. And I appreciate that you said it gives you more time. And I actually had a consultant who would come in and sit with each of the guides for 30 minutes. Now, my guide said, we can't sit for 30 minutes, but the consultant sat for 30 minutes side by side, and they did what you said and really made notes together and then could talk. And it, because she said, it's Julia Volkman, she said, it's not actually about you as the adult. The children are going to show me what I need to know. And it was just such a beautiful way of thinking about it. And it's every time you observe, there's so much value, and it's making sure that it's a priority, and you're really ensuring that you're doing it. And I don't know maybe 3 or 4 that I've met over the years who say, yeah, I observe every day, no problem. I think it's something everyone's working on. So
you touched on something as well with the assistants in the class about them feeling important part of the community. And another thing that I think is really important is like to tell them why they're doing what they're doing. Because, for example, you could just say, oh, can you cut these envelopes and they need to be this size by this size, or the cutting strips need to be 10 by 1. But why are they cutting them? And it's because, like, for example, a cutting strip for a toddler needs to be about 10 centimeters by 1 centimeter, so that when the child is learning to snip, they can have success at like cutting through. Which is very different to cutting along a line for an older child. And so then they're like, oh, that makes sense, because then you're going to get these most perfectly produced strips, because we talk about why it's important that they look beautiful and that they're considered, as opposed to, I think, an assistant or someone in training who doesn't understand. They just think we're being so particular. Why do you need it exactly 10 by 1? Like, it doesn't really matter. And I think that giving meaning is really important. I have a really silly story, but basically I studied accounting and management at university, which is pretty funny, before I moved into education. And so my first job was as a tax consultant for a big accounting company. And I had to work on a depreciation schedule. And I didn't even know what depreciation was. But basically, I had to look up the name of the equipment in the book and find out what percentage, and I put it into this table. And no one sat down and said, oh, depreciation is this. And the reason that we have to calculate it for tax purposes is we're going to save the client money if it's anyway. And I can explain to it now, but it really gave me no meaning. It was the most boring 3 days of my life. And so it's so important for us to really explain, and maybe also to the families, like why it's important that they have shoes that the child can get on and off. You know, sometimes we assume everyone knows, but we don't always explain why we're doing
And I
things.
think it goes back to the partnership conversation. That's when you come from partnership, when you say, here, cut these this way and exactly like this, and there's no explanation. Actually, that's not partnership, right? There's no opportunity for the person to be enrolled or invested because it's just because I said so, which as human beings, that's just
Works for the adults as well, exactly.
never works. So, okay, so can you talk a little bit about how you support children in the classroom, toddlers specifically, with concentration? And what is it like for them?
Yeah, I think the concentration looks so different. So this came to my realization because I've only ever worked with toddlers, really. And so, and babies and some older preschoolers, but not really like the full 3 to 6 classroom that I was running or something. And a 3 to 6 guide came to observe my classroom. And she said, the toddlers aren't concentrating. And I'm like, what is she talking about? My classroom is running really well today. It seems it's completely organized to me, you know. And what I realized is toddler concentration doesn't mean that everyone's sitting at their table with their eyes focused on their work until they're finished and then they take it back to the shelf. A toddler can like be posting coins into a coin box, drop one on the floor, turn around, see what everyone else is doing, come back, put a 1 coin in, then they might just like do a spin because they feel like moving for a moment, and then they come back and put another one in, and then someone comes along and touches it, then they'll look at them, then they'll realize that child's not a problem and then keep going. And so it doesn't look the same. It's actually messier. And when we think that they're not concentrating, so I actually, again, guide any adult in my classroom that is concentration, and we should preserve concentration. And also, how much do we interfere with concentration? So often an educator that doesn't know not to interrupt concentration might think that they're helping by saying, oh, you put all of, even if they're using it in like saying, giving praise, like giving feedback in a nice way, like, oh, you put all the coins into the box rather than good job. They've maybe distracted them from actually what the child was doing. So I'd wait to see if the child looks at me and then, oh, you're excited that you put all the coins in the box. So that's when we kind of look at, when am I breaking concentration? And actually, I love to do an observation exercise in my classroom where you write down what breaks their concentration. And honestly, 90% of times it's something that an adult does in the classroom, not even the children. It's really fascinating. So other things that we do to preserve concentration, particularly if they're transitioning from working at that shelf to working at a table, we might say, yeah, at this time, they're getting really irritated by people coming up and also wanting to play with that activity. It's not really clear because it's not on off the shelf. So then if we can help them to take their work to the table, it marks their space to say, this is my work. We also teach them, in my classroom, we say it will be available soon if another child comes up. And just by giving them the words, it will be available soon, it will be available soon. Some of the older kids are starting to be able to say, it will be available soon. And I actually love that there was a 3-year-old this child just kept coming up to them, and they got up from their chair, they went and got a puzzle, and they went, here, do this puzzle, and then they could go back to their own work. So I just think it was really sweet how children know that they can preserve concentration. And it's also educating other adults, like, why do we have to, like, because I think there's still this, is particularly in Holland, I work in the Netherlands, and there's a phrase called samen delen, samen spelen, which means everyone plays together, everyone shares together. And having to kind of actually educate people why concentration is so important, and that they're constructing themselves as toddlers, you know, this is such a formative period where it's about individual development in society, but they're learning to be in community by waiting for their turn, and then they know that it will be finished and that they'll get their turn, and the other child also knowing, oh, now it's my turn and I can concentrate and get into that deep concentration if needed. And I also actually, we're talking about the 3-hour cycle earlier on. I do like the graph that there was that Dr. Montessori did include in one of her books, where she said, like, the first half an hour, the children come in and they're kind of like greeting the class, and then they get into some work, and usually familiar work and things, and then they have that period where it gets chaotic. and false fatigue, and
Yep.
then they get into the deepest concentration of the day. And I find we have a 2-hour cycle, 2-hour class, and I do see that around an hour into the class, we do get this false fatigue where the children need to pee, or and it's really a wise Montessori education that you can just step back and just count the number of times that the child walks past you, but rather than stepping in to say, oh, can I help you find something right now, because that the deepest concentration, they're going to choose something that's bigger and larger than that really easy work that they kind of are familiar with.
I love that. And I so appreciate that. I think that's such a good tip for everyone is, to give them the space, give them the time.
It's so tempting to kind of go, okay, everyone, let's do some singing now, because I just cannot cope with everyone like kind of melting down at the same time. But it's really pays off if you.
And Children's House too. That's a very, I was a Children's House guide, and you have the same thing. And if you can give them, I found it took about 15 minutes at that level, and then they settle back in. But it is hard. That was my work. It was hard because I wanted to control it. So, okay. So can you talk a little bit about putting things away and supporting toddlers with putting things away?
Yeah, this is another thing that I think was different from what I expected in my training, is that the work cycle is that we model how we carry the tray, and we carry it in 2 hands, and that they'll bring it to the table, and that they'll finish all the pieces, then they'll carry it back. And what I realized is that the first parent-toddler environment I was in, I was a participant with my son, and I noticed that all the parents were really stressed, like, we have to put this back now. We have to put this back now. That was basically what they said at the end of every activity, which actually didn't feel very Montessori to me, because they're showing me that they don't have the skill yet. So how can I model it? So first I model. So for the young child particularly, oh, you're all finished? Okay, it goes back on the shelf. Can you see it's got a special place just here? And I place it on the shelf. And I do that for quite a long time. It's quite a process. And then we might collaborate. Like, would you like to carry this part of the tray? And I'll carry this. And we'll work again together. And then it might be, oh, they need a reminder. So I'll tap the shelf and say, it goes here. And the child then will put it back. And then, I'm talking maybe a year later, then they're doing it all by themselves. Some children pick it up much quicker. But for a young toddler to actually that full work cycle, it can take them a long time. And I think just understanding that it's a process and not something automatic. It definitely helps when you have a classroom of children who have already been coming in, just a couple of new kids start each time, and it's all running very smoothly, because those older children are modeling how it goes, and the younger children pick it up quicker. But for a new classroom environment, it can be a struggle, I think, for the educator to say, oh, this isn't happening how it happened in my training, and I need to establish this very slowly and gently, and again, not top down, but how can I help them build the skills that they don't have yet?
How do I support their self-construction rather than them just following what I'm telling them to do? Right. So, okay. And then I know you have a deep love for food prep in the toddler classroom, and I do too. So we cannot wrap up without you talking about food prep.
Yeah, I do. I say that if you couldn't afford any other Montessori materials, just do food prep with the toddlers, because there's so much that's going on with food preparation. So you have the fine motor skills of, peeling a banana and slicing the banana, then gross motor movement that they have to move their chair while they take the banana peel to the bin, and coordinate while they use the foot pedal and they try to put the banana skin in, and the lid closes and then it opens, and then they're so happy when they finally get it to work, or an older child comes over and holds the lid up for them. And so there's so much beautiful stuff going on there. And then there's the language around it, because you can talk about the knife and the peel and the all of the parts of the banana or whatever you're preparing. We have this really big orange juicing machine that they pull down the arms. So there's definitely gross motor things happening. Executive functioning skills, basically building all of the steps that go along with the practical life activities. And then the community part is oh, who prepared the bananas today? Thank you for preparing the bananas. And they're so pleased with themselves. I prepared the bananas. So they're really excited about it. So I think it's just I have, in my very last classroom that we moved about a year ago, the kitchen area is right in the middle, so that when I'm making some snack, I have always children who come to help, and I can also see what's going on in all other parts of the classroom as well. So it kind of becomes a bit like in our homes, a hub of our little classroom is the food preparation area.
I love that. I love that. I think people will really find that valuable. Okay, so we only have a few more minutes, but can you talk a little bit about the meaning behind the work that we do?
Yeah, I think it touches on what I was talking about before, is like explaining to our assistants why we do these things, but also remembering it ourselves, is like, why am I spending so much time getting the classroom ready? So I think it's hilarious. I have a 2-hour class and I come half an hour early, and I'm usually there an hour and a half after. So I spend as long preparing as I do doing it. But I never think of it as work, and I never think of it as cleaning the classroom. I think I am preparing the classroom. I want it to be as beautiful as possible and as engaging as possible. And I think, again, like with a toddler, it has to be beautiful, because you they don't come with that preconceived idea of what their plan is for the day. So they need to be drawn and attracted to the things that we've laid out. And we want the things to be as self-explanatory as possible, so we don't have to be giving, you know, so many presentations. So that if we set it out where the coins are in a bowl next to the coin box and they're all held together by a tray, then the child can go straight over to the shelf, take it to a table, and begin to post the coins without any, you know, interference. So I think that just thinking, why am I doing this? I want to build their independence. I want to support their development. Is this supporting their development? How can I, you know, and sometimes I forget to keep looking at the children in front of me, like, oh, I'm serving the orange juice. Why am I serving the orange juice? I can get little pitchers and they can serve themselves, you know. But sometimes we just do things on automatic because we've always done them that way, and just always looking with fresh eyes, could I do this better? How can I make it easier on myself? And I think particularly if you're in the classroom every day, you're going to get burnout unless you find ways that you can get the environment to help you and to feel good about the work that you're doing. I'm raising these humans, I'm planting the seeds. And yeah, it's really an honor. Like I bumped into a family who I worked with 15 years ago, and she showed me a little video of her twins who used to be in my classes. And you could still see the spirit of these two children from when they were toddlers, but they were big versions. And so that is our great work, is that we planted those seeds for them to flourish.
And there's no more important work. That's it. Keeping the human spirit engaged and enlightened and enlivened and tended to, so that those young people can go out and make a difference in their world, and they have their own voice. I mean, what a profound gift for those children for their lifetime. This is the work. This is the work. Okay, so I have one more question. Can you talk a little bit about how you make the most out of each moment you have with a child?
That's a good question. I think it comes back to why I love toddlers and being present, and I have to do the same. I just, like, it's the smallest moments with toddlers. I really think one of my favorite things is that the child who is so inefficient, like a toddler, they take a piece of the peel off the banana, and then instead of collecting all of the banana peel, they'll get up from their chair, take it over to the bin, and then come back and then peel the next bit off the banana, and then go back over and put that in the bin, and then come back, and they'll do it like 3 or 4 times. And it just makes me laugh. Like there was one family who worked with me, they just said, I think I'm allergic to inefficiency. This is the most inefficient thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, and I delight in it, because it just reminds me to just like, that's just the most wonderful thing if you've never done that before. So the toddler basically teaches me how to, yeah, get joy from every moment. So just I soak all of that in.
I love that. What a great way to end. So, and this has just been it's such a pleasure to talk to you, and what a great way to start our second season to have you on. And I'm so excited for, you have another book you're working on, right? The Montessori Child.
Yeah. Yeah, Junifer Uzadika, who's from Nigeria, who wrote the Montessori Baby with me. She is trained at all the levels, and so I'm helping her write the book for 3 to 12-year-olds, because everyone was like, what happens after the toddler years? And you know, as Montessori educators, we know about the 4 planes of development and why a child looks radically different as they transition from one plane to the next, and even one subplane to the next subplane. My parents don't know this, and so we've just written a really beautiful, easy to read guide for how you can set up your home to make it accessible, and so the children be independent and capable, and how we can, what kind of activities will be engaging, that they're not always wanting to be drawn to screens, and how do we deal with screens at different ages, and all the questions that families ask about, talking with children about money, or different cultures or when they get things wrong. So we're really excited about that. And there's a whole chapter on social and moral development, as well as a chapter on adolescence, because that kind of like ends out childhood for mostly, you know, we touched on the fourth plane, and that's the trilogy then, the Montessori baby, the Montessori toddler, and the Montessori child. So that will come out in March 2024. We're really excited.
Oh, I'm so excited for it. I can't wait. I find that there's such valuable resources for educators and parents alike. So thank you for doing that work. Thank you for spelling it out. Thank you. You make it so simple and so easy to understand. And I feel like you did such a good job of taking out all the unneeded words so that you could just, it's such an efficient book. And so when I hand it to families who are busy, they feel like they can fit it in their lives, and it's so valuable. So well done. And I'm super excited about the Montessori child. And thank you for coming and joining us today. It was so much fun to talk to you. I feel like our listeners are going to just devour this episode and get so much value out of it. And we're so grateful for you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It was so much fun. It's a delight, and I feel like I want to come and hang out and visit more. I don't know, somehow in person one day.
Yes,
I want to go actually into your school, because I just like hanging out with the kids as well.
That would be great. We would love that. So, well, Simone, and I just want to say thank you. And to our listeners, we just want to say thank you. You all are doing the most important work. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast to hear the latest episodes and join in the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. Take a look at our website at greenspringcenter.org. And you can also get the show notes and for today's episode, which will have links to both of Simone's books and also her website as well, which is www.themontessorinotebook.com. She also has a podcast, which I mentioned earlier, but she has a podcast also specifically for parents. And so we will make sure that all of that information is available to you in our show notes as well. We're so glad you spent time with us today. The work you do is so important, and we're here to help. Join us next time.